They called me a burden while I lay in a hospital bed. On Christmas Eve, with internal bleeding and no one left to call, my parents chose Elton John over my life and their own grandchildren. That night something broke in me, but it wasn't just my heart. It was the cycle of sacrifice I was done repeating. The monitor beeped steadily beside me as I sat upright in my hospital bed, pain radiating from my abdomen like tiny daggers. My 2-year-old twins, Ethan and Emily, sat on the floor nearby, quietly playing with crayons they had borrowed from a nurse. The sterile scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint buzz of holiday decorations flickering half-heartedly along the hallway. It was Christmas Eve. I had called my parents one last time, praying that maybe, just maybe, they'd come through for me this once. But when the video connected, it wasn't concern I saw. It was irritation. An indifference. "Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again," my mother snapped, her voice rising with an edge I'd known since childhood. "We've had these Elton John tickets for months." My hand trembled as I clutched the phone. "It's emergency surgery," I said softly. "There's internal bleeding. I don't know if You're becoming a real nuisance, Natasha," my father cut in. "A burden. We're retired now. We deserve peace. Not this." A nurse named Valerie stood by my bedside, checking my vitals. She looked up just as I set the phone down with trembling hands, tears silently spilling onto the blanket. 4 years, I had sent my parents $2,500 every month to help with their mortgage and expenses. I kept doing it even after James, my husband and the only person who ever truly understood me, was killed by a drunk driver 6 months earlier. I had convinced myself I was being a good daughter, that family meant giving even when nothing came back. How foolish that belief felt now. "They won't help," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Valerie hesitated, then placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "I know someone who can," she said. "A friend of mine, Olivia. She's a nanny. Professional, experienced, and brilliant with children. She worked with trauma cases before going private. Can I call her?" I paused, watching my babies. So small, so innocent, and suddenly so very alone in this world. "Yes," I said. "Please." That decision marked the first cut. Not with a scalpel but with truth. The first step in severing ties, not just with parents who wouldn't help me, but with a version of myself that thought I had to keep earning love. And as Valerie made the call, I looked at Ethan and Emily, and silently promised they would never grow up believing that love was conditional. Not on my watch. As the nurse stepped out to make the call, I closed my eyes and let the silence settle over me. A different kind of pain took root, not the stabbing in my abdomen, but the dull ache of recognition. The realization that I had spent my entire life auditioning for love that was never coming. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from my mother. "Enjoy your little drama. We're already on our way to the concert." I stared at the screen. Not a single word asking how the twins were. No mention of the surgery. Just confirmation that their night with Elton John mattered more than my life. Valerie returned 10 minutes later. "She's on her way," she said with a reassuring smile. "She'll be here within the hour." I nodded, still stunned. "How much will this cost?" "Don't worry about that right now," she said gently. "Let's focus on getting you into surgery." But I was worried. James's life insurance had been minimal. Between hospital bills, childcare, and rent, I was barely holding things together. The $2,500 I had planned to send my parents next week. It suddenly became clear how misdirected that money had been. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. "Can you bring it here?" I asked Valerie, who immediately passed it to me. I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to my parents. Then, with fingers trembling from more than just the 4 drip, I typed out a message to them. "I will no longer be providing financial support. My children and I deserve more than being your afterthoughts. Please don't contact me again." I hit send. For a moment nothing happened. No crash of thunder. No earth-shattering shift. Just a quiet exhale. And then something unexpected: relief. By the time Olivia arrived, I was already prepped for surgery. She entered the room with calm, capable energy, crouched to meet the twins at eye level, and began talking to them in the soft, confident voice of someone who knew how to ease fear without false promises. Ethan looked up at her curiously. Emily handed her a crayon. I watched the scene with tears threatening again, but this time for a different reason. Not grief, not disappointment, hope. And just before they wheeled me out of the room, I whispered to Olivia, "Thank you for showing up when no one else did." She nodded and smiled. "You're not alone anymore." The bright lights of the operating room blurred into shadows as the anesthesia took hold. And the last thing I remember was Olivia's voice softly assuring the twins that Mommy would be okay. When I woke up, it was dark. The pain was dull but constant, anchored deep in my side. A nurse adjusted my murmuring something about a successful procedure. I drifted in and out of sleep for what felt like days. Sometimes I'd wake to Olivia reading quietly while the twins napped. Sometimes to Emily's tiny hand in mine, or Ethan's stuffed bunny tucked under my blanket. On the third day, I was alert enough to notice my phone blinking. 27 missed calls. 14 unread messages. All from my parents. I opened them more out of habit than hope. "This is ridiculous, Natasha. We can't pay the mortgage if you're going to be this dramatic. You can't just cut us off. We have a cruise next month. Non-refundable." Not one asked how the surgery went. Not one asked if the twins were okay. Jessica, my sister, had also messaged, hers read differently. "Mom said you had some minor procedure? They're freaking out about money. What's going on?" I stared at her words, my heart sinking. Of course, they lied to her too. Still groggy, I typed back the truth. That it had been emergency surgery. That I'd asked for help with the kids. That they had chosen concert tickets over their daughter and grandchildren. Her reply came quickly. "Oh my God, Natasha. I had no idea. I would have helped. I would have come." And for the first time in years, I believed her. Jessica wasn't heartless. She had just been raised to believe she mattered more. Conditioned to assume everything would be handled for her. And maybe finally she was seeing what our parents had never let her see. I lay back against the pillow, exhausted. But there was something else rising in me now, clarity. The narrative I'd been fed my whole life, that I was the difficult one, the emotional one, the one always asking for too much, was unraveling. I hadn't asked for too much. I had simply asked for what any daughter deserved. Care, presence, and basic compassion. And when that wasn't given, I chose something different. I chose peace. I chose truth. I chose myself. 5 days after surgery, I was discharged from the hospital. Olivia arrived early that morning with the twins dressed, fed, and humming a little tune they'd picked up from her. She had transformed my darkest week into something manageable, even gentle, and I would never forget that. Back at my apartment, everything looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. The woman who had walked out the door to that hospital, terrified and apologetic, wasn't the one who had just come back. I lay down carefully on the couch, one hand pressed against my stitched side. Olivia guided the twins to the play area, then returned with a cup of warm tea and a quiet smile. "You're doing better than you think," she said. I nodded, not sure if I believed it yet. Later that evening, while the twins napped, I checked my bank account. The next automatic payment to my parents, the one I had canceled, was supposed to have gone out yesterday. It hadn't. And that realization brought more relief than guilt. That $2,500 was a third of my income. A monthly offering to people who saw me not as family, but as a funding source. And for the first time I began to wonder, what could I build if I invested that energy into my children, and myself instead? I hired Olivia part-time that week, at a rate that was more than fair but far less than what I had been sending my parents. She agreed gladly, touched and humbled. "Your children are extraordinary," she said. "You've raised them with so much love. I'd be honored to help." I also contacted a lawyer and began drafting my will. It felt morbid but necessary. I designated Olivia and my best friend Melissa as emergency guardians for Ethan and Emily, not my parents. That chapter was over. Jessica began visiting more often. She brought meals, offered help, and played with the twins. Our conversations were careful at first, like stepping over broken glass barefoot. But in those quiet moments, I saw glimpses of the sister I had always hoped she could be. One afternoon, while Ethan stacked blocks and Emily hummed beside him, Jessica looked at me and said, "I never realized they pushed you out. I thought you just drifted." "I never drifted," I replied gently. "I just stopped chasing people who never looked back." And Jessica said nothing. But this time she didn't look away. It came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. A sharp knock at the door, familiar in rhythm but foreign in feeling. I froze. Through the peephole I saw them, my parents. My mother clutched her designer purse like it might shield her from consequence. My father stood rigid, arms crossed, the same cold authority etched into his face that had once silenced entire rooms. I opened the door just a few inches, enough to see but not to invite. "What do you want?" I asked, voice steady. My mother's smile was brittle. "We've been so worried, darling. You haven't returned our calls. We needed to make sure you and the children were all right," my father added, the concern in his voice practiced, not genuine. "We're fine," I said flatly. "If that's all." "It's not," he interrupted, stepping forward. "We need to talk about this financial nonsense." The mortgage payment bounced. We had to use cruise money. Cruise money. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. I didn't. Instead, I looked at them both. "You're standing at my door days after I nearly died. And the only thing you're worried about is money?" My mother bristled. "That's not fair. We made one mistake. Are you really going to punish us like this?" "This isn't punishment," I replied. "This is consequence." Their eyes widened. I continued. "I asked for one thing, your help. And in my worst moment, you chose a concert over your own daughter and her children. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. We're your parents," my father snapped, as if the title itself were a pass. "And I'm a parent now too," I said. "And I will never treat Ethan and Emily the way you treated me." At that moment, Emily toddled into view, her stuffed giraffe in hand. My mother immediately bent down. "There's Grandma's precious girl." Emily stepped back behind my legs, shy and unsure. "She doesn't know you," I said gently. "And I won't force her to." My father's face twisted, more in disbelief than regret. "So that's it? You're cutting us off forever." "I'm choosing peace," I replied. "And that peace comes with boundaries." I closed the door, not in anger but with clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the little girl begging to be seen. I was the mother protecting what mattered most. And I wasn't looking back. The next day they came back. This time with backup. Aunt Patty stood outside my door, umbrella in one hand, her voice rising in syrupy concern as she knocked. "Natasha, honey, let's be reasonable. Your parents are struggling. You can't just cut them off like this." I didn't open the door. "They've always been there for you," she added, now with a theatrical sigh. "They sacrificed everything to raise you." I stood behind the door in silence, watching Emily nap on the couch, her tiny fingers curled around a stuffed elephant. That was sacrifice. That was love. Not guilt-drenched debt masquerading as family. "They managed for decades without me," I finally replied through the door. "They chose early retirement. They chose cruises and a boat over security. I'm done paying for choices I didn't make." Later that evening the guilt came, but not from inside me. It arrived in the form of a group email. From my father. Subject line: "A daughter's betrayal." He'd written to the entire extended family, painting me as a heartless daughter who had abandoned her aging parents in their time of need. There was no mention of my emergency surgery. No mention of the twins. No mention of the concert. Just talk of lifelong support, and how I had suddenly turned cold. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then the replies started rolling in. "Cousin Michael. Didn't you just buy a new boat last month?" Aunt Marlene. "You never mentioned Natasha was in the hospital. Are you sure we're getting the full story?" Even Aunt Patty, the one who had stood at my door earlier, called me privately. "I'm so sorry," she said, sounding sheepish. "They told me you were recovering from a simple checkup." I forwarded her the discharge summary from the hospital. Her silence on the other end of the line was all the confirmation I needed. Jessica, now firmly in my corner, helped me write a single factual reply to the family thread. "I recently underwent emergency surgery with a high risk of complications. My parents were asked to care for their grandchildren but declined due to concert plans. I have chosen to focus on recovery and providing a stable home for my children. I hope for peace, not drama." The response was short, unemotional, and true. And it was enough. Because this time I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. With each passing day, the silence from my parents grew louder, but so did my sense of freedom. Without the financial burden of supporting them, I could finally breathe. I hired Olivia for 3 days a week. With her help, I was able to ease back into my freelance graphic design work. My clients were understanding. My deadlines were flexible. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was doing more than just surviving. I was starting to live. Jessica became a regular presence. She brought groceries, read to the twins, and sat on my couch with quiet apologies that didn't need to be spoken. She had seen our parents clearly now. And even if the past couldn't be rewritten, she was choosing a different path forward. One morning as the twins played in the backyard, yes, a backyard, I stood on the porch of our new rental home, coffee in hand, and smiled. With the help of a widow's support group, I'd found a small 3-bedroom house in a quieter neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. The rent was lower than my old apartment, and the yard meant everything to the twins. I had also started a side business, designing memorial websites for grieving families. It was born from the one I had created for James. Through that project I had found healing. Through helping others I was finding purpose. Meanwhile, my parents continued spiraling. Jessica, trying to mediate, had discovered they were on the verge of foreclosure. Their boat was gone. The cruise was canceled. Their savings, nearly depleted. My father had made a bad investment, one of those guaranteed return schemes pitched by a golfing buddy. Jessica called me one night, her voice tight with frustration. They assumed you'd come around. That it was just a phase. It's not a phase, I said. It's a boundary. They need help, she said quietly. So did I replied. And then came the inevitable knock. Again. But this time when I opened the door, my parents weren't demanding. They were pleading, with a spreadsheet in hand and tired eyes. We need $144,000 to keep the house, my father said. His voice, once sharp and firm, now cracked under the weight of consequence. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply asked, what about the boat? The timeshare? The trips? We'd take a loss, he said. You already did, I replied. The moment you chose them over me. They sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by quiet walls that had never known their laughter. My father, once so sure of his place in the world, stared down at a spreadsheet filled with red ink. My mother wrung her hands over her now scuffed designer purse, eyes flicking nervously between me and the hallway, hoping to spot the twins. They're napping, I said calmly. And no, I won't wake them. But we haven't seen them in so long, she said, voice cracking slightly. You've barely met them, I corrected. That was your choice. My father tried to steady his voice. Natasha, we're asking for help. As your parents. And I'm telling you I helped for years, I said. I paid your mortgage, your cruises, your luxuries. Even after James died. Even while grieving. Even while raising 2 babies alone. We thought you enjoyed helping, my mother murmured. No, I said. I endured it. Because I thought it was love. They fell silent. I continued. But when I needed you just once, you were gone. And that told me everything I needed to know. Just then, the twins appeared in the hallway, rubbing their eyes and holding their stuffed animals. My mother's expression softened instantly. There are my sweet angels, she whispered. Emily looked up at me unsure. Mommy, who are they? I knelt beside her. Just visitors, sweetheart. They're leaving soon. That was all the answer she needed. She nodded and toddled back toward the playroom, Ethan trailing behind her. I stood and looked at my parents. I won't let people into their lives who think love is earned by obedience or measured by money. I'm building something different now. Something honest. We raised you, my father said, almost defensively. And I've raised myself ever since, I replied. When they left that afternoon, I didn't watch from the window. I didn't cry. I didn't wonder if I was doing the right thing. I already knew. 3 months later, I received a letter from my mother. Handwritten. Apologetic. Surprisingly honest. She admitted to jealousy, pride, fear. She acknowledged their failure. And for once didn't beg or demand. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply said, we see it now. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if healing is possible. But I do know this. My children will grow up knowing their mother stood firm. That she chose love with boundaries. And that walking away from pain, even when it wears the face of family, is not weakness. It is strength. It is legacy. And it is freedom.